Now, if this was a regular story, it would start with, once upon a time, in a long, long, long time ago, a place far, far, far away. But this is not a regular story. You see, this is not a fairy tale or a myth or a legend. This is an active story happening right here, right now. It is not from a place far, far away. It is not from a time long, long, long ago. This is happening today. Now, many fairy tales start with someone being born, usually the hero, and so will this story. And where I'm from, birth is welcomed with an well, not this birth. This birth is unremarkable. It is welcomed by the chugging, the cranking, and the sighing of an industrial processing line under the harsh white lights of an industrial processing plant, right at the core of the Big Four agenda. This birth has nothing special about it. This child is not unique in any way. Actually, in the moment he's born, hundreds of others are born and thousands are born in the same minute. There is no ceremony, not even a naming ceremony. And so we shall take the task of naming upon ourselves. We shall call this child Paco. Now, Paco slides down the conveyor belt and lands on the hands of a nurse who looks at him and sees that he is a plastic packet of milk. And he puts him in a crate and pushes him away. And as Paco looks up from the crate, all plump and jiggly, he marvels at this new world that he has been brought into. And he catches a bit of a conversation that is going on between the worker who just put him on the crate and a colleague of hers. She sounds passionate. It's like, hey, so I was in a matatu the other day, and I was scrolling down Twitter to distract myself, and I come across this link, and I click on it, and I start reading. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I thought this generation doesn't read a lot. Well, first of all, that is generalizing. We do read a lot, and that's besides the point. Do you really want to hear this story or not? Okay, just go ahead, tell me the story. Okay, so I'm reading this story, and I come across this interesting fact that claims that Nairobi wasn't even meant to be a city. It is a proper accidental city. I mean, we all know the popular story about how the British landed here halfway through their crazy project to create this railway line so they could properly exploit Buganda. And they came across this scenic plain that had beautiful hills in the background. And they concluded that this land was unoccupied. But you see, they were wrong there because this land was occupied. It was occupied by the Ogiek, the Gikuyu, and the Maasai. It's just that smallpox at that specific moment had done a number on their numbers, so they were forced to occupy less land actively. So the British looked at this beautiful plain with this stream of rivers just beautifully meshing together, and they decided that this was a perfect place to build a small railway depot. Now they took the fact that there was relatively high altitude and thought that this land was safe from mosquitoes. Well, unfortunately, they were wrong about that too. You see, mosquitoes were just sitting, rubbing their hands together, waiting, because this land had been called Nkare Nairobi by the Maasai for a very specific reason. It was a swamp, a marsh, and there were pools of breeding mosquitoes all around. But they did not care. In 1899, they started the railway depot, a small one, concluding that it wasn't going to grow into anything big. I mean, at most, it was going to be a small shopping center. But fast forward, and they discovered that they were wrong about that too, because in 1906, the population of this small railway depot had already hit 10,000 people. It was a flourishing town now with all manners of people. And just picture this. A small depot is growing into a big town. And right at the heart of it, at the central business district, the one area where most of the trade between the Africans, the Europeans, and the Asians is happening, is called the Indian Bazaar. It's busy. It has all loads of trade going on. Now, I don't know if it was as loud as Nairobi is today, but one thing I'm sure about is that when there is such high volumes of trade, there is equally as high volumes of solid waste being generated. And this is 1902. So you need to remember that garbage collection trucks are not in vogue yet. Actually, they haven't been invented yet. And so the garbage piles and piles and piles and piles on the Indian bazaar. And something makes it worse. You see, people are living in this Indian bazaar. They're living there with their families, with their pets, and with their cattle. And that is a wholesome recipe for disaster. It is danger bubbling on a stove. And would you want to know what the secret ingredient is? Would you want to know what the last addition that will spark this catastrophe is? Well, I'll tell you. The secret ingredient is rats. At some point in 1902, people start dying in the Indian bazaar, mysteriously. And the residents are panicking. What's going on? And luckily for them, before the number of dead people hits 20, a doctor by the name of Rosendo Ribeiro, who has set up shop in the Indian bazaar, manages to diagnose this disease. And he tells them to relax. There's no need to worry. It's just the bubonic plague. And everyone loses their mind. What do you mean, relax? What do you mean? The bubonic plague, the black plague, it almost deleted half of Europe from history. Well, that would have saved our ancestors a lot of trouble. Shut up, that is rude and out of context. Anyway, so Dr. Ribeiro, who is famous for riding around the town on a zebra, is behooved to do something. So he earns his stripes by approaching the medical officer in charge of health in the whole town, a doctor by the name of Alfred Spurrier, and tells him of the looming danger. Dr. Spurrier spurs to action. He shows up and does the one thing that he is confident is going to save the town. He orders that the whole Indian bazaar be burnt down. Wait, what? Yeah, that's very, I think it's an overreaction to me too. I mean, he also ends up burning the clinic that belongs to Dr. Rosendo Ribeiro. But the town is saved. The Indian bazaar is saved. It moves to the current Biashara Street, and the plague is stopped. But the problem is, even as the ashes are cooling down, someone proposes that the whole town being moved to somewhere that's more habitable, probably closer to Ngong Hills. But the suggestion is rejected. And 2 years down the line, there is another outbreak, and they are forced yet again to reconsider the proposal to move the town. It is rejected yet again, and now we are stuck with a problem of waste disposal that we've been having for over 114 years now. Now, the worker is still holding on to the crate, and the person she's been telling the story is just looking at her with an incredulous look on his face. It's like, okay, I get it. So they built Nairobi on a swamp, so that should be able to explain why we have so much flooding. Well, yes and no. I mean, there are other countries with bigger land reclaiming problems. I mean, there's the Emirates, there's South Korea, the Netherlands. Our problem is that we have poor planning. There's an administration that just hasn't figured out how to pick up garbage, and a population that just won't stop littering. So picture this. The city is growing. The town is growing even bigger. And no one has decided to move it. And as they keep on telling their crazy stories, the crate of Paco, remember Paco, our packet of milk, is moving down the conveyor belt. And as he moves further away, he cannot hear what they are saying. And the crate is placed upon another, and they're taken up and pushed inside a truck. And an engine rolls to life, and it moves out of the industrial park. And it moves through the city, hitting potholes, some that are bigger than our national debt. And it goes through Nairobi. It is early in the morning. The street lights, some of them are still awake. You can see Nairobi from anywhere, and it doesn't look like that town from 1902. There's this tinge of tear gas remaining from the previous evening when the hawkers were being dispersed, and it mingles with a stench of disappointment, apathy, and poverty that wraps itself around the homeless of Nairobi. They sleep on these cardboard boxes that they recycle, almost like camouflage, as they blend in with the piles of garbage that are still here 114 years later. And they're just a fraction of the over 3,000 tons that this city produces in one day. Now, only a third of that is collected. Now, where the rest disappears to is a mystery. But then again, this is a country of mysteries. A lot of things disappear here, including the garbage, billions and sometimes even people. So the lorry passes through town and it ends up in one of the Nairobi estates. And Paco is taken and placed on a shelf where he watches as his brothers and sisters are being bought by Kenyans early in the morning. And they're showing up. They look exhausted even that early in the morning. Their shoulders stooping low, being weighed down by the weight of heavy taxes. And they pick up the milk and they're out there preparing breakfast, ready for yet another day of struggling in a system that seems designed to make sure they do not survive. And Paco stays here, excited, waiting to know which Kenyan is going to pick him up and take him home and make breakfast probably out of him. But at some point, he started to lose hope. It looks like no one is going to pick him up. But later, in the late afternoon, he's bundled up with all the remaining packets of milk, put in a big recyclable fiber bag, and thrown into the boot of a car. The driver is young, and he has a friend on the passenger seat. And he's speaking in a language that is a mixture of both Kiswahili and English that Paco suddenly understands for no reason other than he's born in Kenya. And this guy is wondering, hey, you guy, my guy, kwani where are we pelekaing all these maziwa? We're like, oh, my guy. So we're taking it for my dad's pal's matanga. He died juicy. And you know, my dad was born in the ghetto. But not like the ghetto. Like back then it wasn't the ghetto. But then he talks about these weird things that I don't understand called SAPs. And he says in the 80s and 90s, life was really difficult. And his hood, Dandora, turned into a hot mess. So by the time he malizas primo and goes to high school and graduates through campus, gets a job, because apparently it was easier back then. It's not like now when a third of everyone you know has a degree and everyone is looking for a job. So he goes and gets a job, starts a family. We are born. I mean, you know the usual. But then my dad's best friend has a totally different life, you guy. You see, he drops out of class 7 because his parents were activists or something. I mean, you know those guys who always have panganga for criticizing the government. Somehow apparently got taken to their house and disappeared. And now he starts roving around. And by that time, the dump site in Dandora has become this big thing. And he starts going there every day and picking up these pieces of plastic and picking up all these pieces of metal and selling them to get food for survival and clothes. So he's still there, even in 1996 and 2001, when my dad finishes campus. And he comes, I was like, yeah, so this place is already full, and I hear they've already announced that it cannot take any more garbage, but there are no options coming from the government. So he stays there. And by 2001, there is a proper economy ongoing on the garbage disposal site at Dandora. They have cartels before cartels are even invented. They have a proper multi-million structure that determines who disposes garbage there, at what time, who takes the money, where the money goes, and what they do with it. They even protect it with all these gangs and extortions and sometimes even murder. So at some point, my dad's best friend decides, me, I want out. I have enough cash. I think I can buy a nice land somewhere, build a piece of land, and live there with my wife and children. And so he calls my dad. I was like, hey, my guy, me, I want out. And my dad calls him, and they go out, and they execute his vision. And it's right on time, because that's when there's a big shootout at the Dandora dump site. And some leaders have to go there and intervene, and about 5 guns are recovered. It is a big mess. But you know, how when you think you've ponead, life just decides you've not had enough. That happens to him. You see, he falls sick, and he goes to hospital. And as he walks around Kenyan hospitals, he gets misdiagnosed. He's told he has a cold. At times he's told he has pneumonia. Other times he's told he has TB. But eventually, a doctor tells him the truth. He has lung cancer. And he has to go to India for treatment. It's crazy how that's our normal, right? I mean, just think of how easy it would be if you just needed to go to Kisumu or Nakuru for advanced treatment. But no, he has to go to India. And so we start fundraising for him. And he lives. And he has all kinds of therapy that I don't understand. He has chemotherapy, radiotherapy, physiotherapy, mental therapy, all kinds of therapy. And us here, we're just doing harambes, hoping that our healthcare system would work better. And we send money to him, and we are hoping for the best. And he does come back home, but he comes back home in a coffin. And now is why we are going for this matanga with these packets of milk, because we need to raise money to clear his hospital bills and to make sure that he is buried in dignity. And unfortunately, his kids are now in the same exact situation that he was when his parents disappeared in the 80s. So Paco is taken out of the car and escorted into the house. And as he goes, he can already visualize his immediate future. Someone will empty him of the milk, and he'll be tossed into a dustbin, and later into a garbage collection bag, and then into a truck, and straight into a dump site. Or maybe fall onto a trench somewhere and block drainage. And maybe finally get Kenyans angry enough to demand for accountability, to demand for better systems of collecting garbage. Paco's future has a few options. The best case scenario is he will get recycled and basically reincarnate. Or he might be incinerated and become part of the fumes that continue to mess up the health of Kenyans. Or, in the worst case scenario, he might just be one of the elements that leads us to yet another outbreak of the bubonic plague. Or the choice, ladies and gentlemen, is ours. Thank you.